All right, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. Today we're going to be talking about Connected BIM. So a little intro before we get rolling. So for those who aren't familiar with Microdesk, we are an AECO industry consulting firm. We were established in 1994. We have 12 locations across the U.S., and we're also international now with the United Kingdom. And as part of our team, we have over 140 different consulting specialists, including our software development team, that have an industry experience. All of us have actually worked in the field. So what that means is that our clients have needs with creating building information models, managing them, working out enterprise strategies for long-term goals, working on mentoring of their own team, or have the requirements of application development. We actually help all of our clients with all of those things and many more. Now, for today's presentation, leading it's going to be myself, Peter Marchese. I'm a senior technology evangelist at Microdesk. And what that means is I have a focus on the emerging technologies. So my background is I worked as an architect for about 10 years, and I've been doing the consulting end with all of our clients for about 12 now. And my focus is on the BIM processes and taking them further. So it's not just doing basic BIM, but what else can you do with it now? And in many respects, that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. So, Connected BIM. Our agenda is going to be, we're going to go over what Connected BIM is. We're going to talk about what it brings to our tool set. So what new features and benefits is it going to give us? We're going to talk a little bit about how it's in use already. So it's nice to talk about technology, but if it's not being used by anybody else, sometimes it's hard to believe it's actually going to work. And then we're going to wrap it up and have some Q&A. Now, before we get rolling, though, I would like to ask everybody just a couple of questions. So just a couple of quick polls for everybody. So first one is, what is your role? Awesome. Thank you very much, everybody. A lot of people in the other category today. Yes. And how many people are currently using BIM applications? So BIM 360, BIM 360 Team, Docs, any of those tools, Revit, Navisworks, those kind of tools. Awesome. Glad to see a lot of people in the yes category today. For those in the no, hopefully some of the things that we show you today will push you a little bit more towards that. Alrighty. And the last one, are you currently using any cloud or mobile tools? So it could be apps on your phone or a tablet or different cloud tools to coordinate and share work with others. Great. Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate your information. Helps us make sure we're focusing on the things that people need, and also I can drive this a little bit better. So, Connected BIM. So over the past few years, the presentations that I've given and that we've talked to our clients a lot, we've been talking about how the industry and its technology and use is actually changing. Now, a large part of that is talking about the cloud. So in terms of that, we're not focusing on just reaching out to each other and sharing files, but we're also talking about the other things that it can give us. So it helps us coordinate. It helps us take advantage of more powerful tools than we would otherwise, things like analysis, coordination, or even just communication like Slack. Now, with that kind of connectivity, one of the other things that it brings us is towards the Internet of Things. We've talked a little bit about that as well. Now, when you talk about the Internet of Things, a lot of it comes down to data, whether we're using that data to find information about the projects that we work on. Whether in the lower left-hand corner, we're talking about safety, embedding sensors into structural elements or before or after it's completed that help us ensure that what we're doing is safe, or sensors into buildings to control the amount of natural daylight. And for most of us at this point, something that allows us to track our health, like our step counts. Now, with all of the data that we're collecting, whether it's during design, after design, or just generally, some of the data that we're collecting is more from a business sense. And the benefit of that is it helps us back up what we're talking about. So when we talk about this is why we need to move to BIM. This is how many people are currently doing this. We're not just guesstimating. We actually have the information that can say this is where our industry is falling behind others. This is how and why we need to move forward. Now, when you combine all of those things together, it helps us start to define what we're looking at and what we need to do to grow forward. And that typically leads us to where we are now when we're talking about BIM. But the reality is when we're talking about BIM, it's very rarely just about BIM. We're not just talking about creating a model or even just putting a few models together and looking at it. We're talking typically about the cloud. And when we talk about the cloud, it's not a single thing. It's a patchwork of a large amount of different connected elements. All of those are coming together to create an overall solution, one big process. Now, in terms of how we got there, if you look about the evolution of technology in our field, we started off with the documentation. We moved from the boards to the computer, and that gave us AutoCAD. CAD was basically computerized drafting. I'm drawing a line similar to how I used to. It made things faster if I was doing it multiple times. We've started work about optimization, and that's really the area where we're kind of at right now. We're on the cusp of the next one, but it's building information modeling, where we're actually adding data and information. We're really benefiting from that. And that essentially leading us to the era of connection. Almost everybody has a device that's constantly connected, whether they, in some cases, want it or don't want it to be. But it allows them to connect themselves to a lot of other people. And we're talking about also doing that with our projects. Now, this sort of leads to two kinds of BIM in many people's minds. Now, the terms are a little bit funny, but you've got lonely BIM. What this means is that you might be the only one on a project that's working in a BIM application. So you might have your model, everything's cool that you're working on, it's all coordinated, but all around you is a lot of 2D information. People are still sending you flat AutoCAD or MicroStation or other 2D information that then you need to figure out how to communicate on. Or all the BIM information that you have is sort of siloed. It's locked away. It's not being shared or worked with everybody else. So the other version is social or connected BIM. Now, what this means is that as you're working on the project, you're sharing your content, you're sharing your information. You might actually be working in a shared model, whether it's using the internet, like something like collaboration for Revit, or you're using other tools like, say, Flux to coordinate with others and actually share that data. So that's where most things are actually leading towards, and in many cases, people are already doing that. And also, again, if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to type it into the chat or the question box. I am keeping an eye on that. Now, what this leads to, first one is definitely going to be better coordination. That's the easy one. In many cases, it's a low-hanging fruit. Most people are already used to using tools like, say, a Dropbox. The thing is, Dropbox allows you to coordinate more of an office setup. If I need people to type in into like a Word file or PowerPoint, it's great. But when we start talking about projects, buildings, whether it's in design during construction or for the facility management during the life cycle, what we're talking about is something that we need to really coordinate a large amount of people that have vastly different needs across the project. So things like BIM 360 allow us to do that. But it's not the only one. Again, we're looking at connecting a lot of different things. One of the other tools that are out there are tools that allow me to connect multiple programs together. So something like, say, Flux. Flux allows me to take something like Revit, connect it to Excel, connect it to Revit or Dynamo in other offices, other parts of the world, even to SketchUp or Rhino. So there's a lot of things that are enabling connectivity between programs, people, or apps that weren't there before. Now, part of this on the other side of Autodesk is Forge. And this example was actually from a company, J.E. Dunn. What they actually did was they identified some problems, some things that they wanted to focus on. And one of those things was unifying their ERP and their projects and avoiding data silos within their office. So they took advantage of Forge, which is Autodesk's cloud API, and did some of the programming themselves and connected all these things together. So you're looking at one of the tools they have internally created to manage their process and make it much more connected. So they're using the cloud to connect all the dots. Now, another part of that coordination that we're looking at in terms of this connected BIM is multiple use cases of the same content. So if you're looking at, I'm making a design in something, but I'm having a hard time understanding it. VR, visualization tools, are rapidly becoming something that is not future tech. It's something that's already here. So we're doing a lot more demos for our clients to show them the benefit of it, and the technology is not, the requirements have gotten much simpler for people. It's not as expensive and it's easier to get into. So we're seeing more people take advantage of fully immersing themselves in space and coordinating inside of it. Now, this better coordination tends to lead to better design. And comically, one of the things I'm going to say here is that it's CAD. And not kidding, not going crazy. When I say CAD, I'm talking about computer-aided design. Now, when most people say CAD, they think of something like AutoCAD, 2D line work. I'm not talking about that. Drawing in 2D never aided a person with their design. It's not going to tell me what I need to do. It's not going to say, hey, I think you should put this over there. When I say CAD, that's what I'm referring to. I'm talking about the tools that when I input my needs, it actually goes through the process and says, hey, I think you should look at these options. These are some of the solutions that I came up with. So I'm looking at computers actually aiding my design process, helping me out, helping me find a solution. Definitely not replacing me in the process, but helping me narrow down my choices. So I'm looking at a smaller set as opposed to starting off with a blank piece of paper and an unlimited amount of options. So think of us as designers. How often do you only have time to come up with maybe 5 designs to present to the client or to choose from? What if you could run through thousands of designs and then very quickly narrow down on the ones that you want? And that's actually what Autodesk did. So this little video that's going to play here is an office layout for Autodesk in Canada. What they did was they actually got surveys from their users, found out what they required, what they preferred or needed. You know, I prefer cold, I prefer hot. I want natural daylight, I need quiet, I want to be by my team. And it took in all of that information, looked at the actual space planning, looked at the lighting, and then came up with a lot of different options for people to pick from. So their designers were able to narrow in on the actual solutions to that. It didn't replace the designer. It gave the designer more tools to focus with. Now, coming from that, we also have better management. Now, most people out there probably are very familiar with using Outlook. Within Outlook, we have the ability to create rules. So the one I'm looking at here is whenever I get an email from BIM 360 Field, I want to put it in a specific folder. It just makes it easier to organize. I'm not sure if a lot of people realize that you have these kind of tools in some of the BIM applications. So if I'm looking at Navisworks now, I can create almost the exact same kind of a rule for my clash detection. So connecting these different tools together, creating rules, using things from, in this case, the Internet of Things. If this, then that. I'm creating different rules to help me manage my projects, manage my buildings, spaces. Looking at this, they're putting on a sensor on a roadway. And if the vibrations exceed this, then I need you to shut down the bridge, or I need you to send an alert for an inspection team. I'm doing all of these things to actually get more and more data back. I mentioned how data was a big thing in the beginning. Once I have all this data, I can then track that. I can get ahead of the project. I can see trends and then react to this. Some of this is going to be web-based, definitely mobile, and a lot of this can be live. So as I'm walking through a space, I can see if there's a problem, and then if need be, I can get a notification. And this next example, again from Autodesk, shows that. So you could be actually working in an office, and maybe there's a problem with the HVAC system. So you put in a little ticket, and that sends it through. Now, the thing with this is if you have a building that actually is connected, you started off with all the data, you maintained that data through construction, and in many cases embellished that and added to that. So now when there actually is a problem, it notices that there's performance setbacks. It notices that temperature is going too high. You can actually have a lot of these things be very automated. So it creates the ticket because it sees that I am in a certain level. Again, if this, then that. If the temperature goes beyond the safe realm, create a ticket. That ticket gets sent to a person. That person then has all the information at their fingertips to actually see what they need to work with. So again, we're working with all that intelligent data that gets maintained. I can add to that things like the maintenance manual. And they go through it, they can fix it, that then updates, and then people can actually see the benefits of that. And we're connecting all of these different features to ensure that everything is running smoothly, not just in design, but in the facilities. Now, those two examples were pretty cool, but the thing is, let's actually talk about some real projects outside of Autodesk. So a couple of them from buildings. So this is an international airport in China. Very big, very smooth, swooping designs. But when you start looking at frames that are like this, there tends to be a lot of problems or a lot of complexities. In this case, they used over 11,000 tons of steel. But with this, they ran into a lot of difficulties with the actual geometry. So the detailers actually turned to Dynamo. The benefit of that is it saved them 33% of the time to detail, and that translated to 20% savings in labor costs because they were able to actually automate a lot of the process, to streamline it. They're not trying to figure out all of these organic shapes manually. They can just do it programmatically. Another one here is a headquarters building in Germany. And their Connected BIM was more on the design side, the more on the presentation and making sure everybody that's a part of the project actually understands what's going on, what the intent is. So for this, they were able to determine that they actually accelerated their decision making, and that reduced the time planning by 30%, which led to 80% visualization time because the tools that they used were essentially automated. And that also allowed them to put it into VR. So they were able to experience what's going on long before it's finished and without having to do any physical mock-ups to show the client. Another one here is more focused on using the internet to actually physically coordinate across the teams. So this specific project in Australia, that included 7 different offices. So you're talking about 45 different people working across the clock. So different offices, one would turn off, another one would turn on, and you're handing the project over. Now, the benefit of putting this not on an office network, but putting it in the cloud, now your IT doesn't have to actually have the infrastructure. It's not something they need to maintain, which led to a very simple ecosystem. So it allowed the teams to adopt different tools for sharing, for reviewing, and for managing the project. Yep. So that's more on the building side, but when we look past the building and go more into construction, it's the same thing. So this is Mortensen looking at the US Bank Stadium. This project had over 60,000 points linking the model elements in the virtual world to the physical equivalent. So think of it this way. If you have to know exactly where something is, you have all these different angles, all these different connection points. That allows me to manage all of those objects, and I'm using the software to help me do so. That actually saved 6 weeks of the construction schedule. So rather than having to try to figure out where all these points are, where 20,000 elements are manually or from an Excel spreadsheet, now I can look at the model, I can track its timeline. You can see the simulation in the upper right-hand corner with the colors showing me where things actually are in real time. And you can make sure you're not falling ahead or moving ahead or falling behind, which would cause problems. Another one here in Ireland, this is more on the facilities. So that video we saw from Autodesk, same thing. So after construction, typically there's going to be a setup time for getting the systems running, making sure all the information is correct. So in this case, they went from 4 months using their old system of transferring the information, getting the building up and running, testing everything. They did all the transfer information in 2 hours because it's all in the cloud. You're connecting it. And then when they looked at doing tasks, so I need to assign something. I need to make sure that this happens. They knocked it down from about 3 minutes to about half a minute. And then the benefit of this is that, let's say somebody needs access information. They need to find it. It could take up to 6 minutes. That's not that long. But comparatively, using a mobile device, they just scan the barcode, and that brings it up in about 5 seconds. So 6 minutes might not be that big of a deal. It's only a few. But let's say that there's something that's a critical failure. You know, maybe something is overheating to the point where it might go on fire or it might set off the sprinklers. That 6 minutes could definitely eat into that and cause more of a problem. Whereas 5 seconds where you bring it up very quickly. Now, most of the time when we talk about BIM, people tend to focus on the actual building, whether it's design or construction. But the reality is, BIM is not just for one kind of thing. It's not just for the building. It's also very much for the site and for the infrastructure. So what we're looking at here is a dam. And by mixing, again, different tools together, taking advantage of the cloud. So tools we talk about here are the laser scans, photogrammetry. So you're flying a UAV, you're doing typical ground lasers, and you're putting all that together in a tool like Recap. From that, then we put that into Revit. So we can create the building from there. We make sure that whatever we're designing fits exactly in the real built environment. And from there, you can visualize it. And we're looking past just design visualization. You can use this for security standpoint. And in a place like this that's going to have visitors, you can use that for outreach and education. Other tools like this one are great for a high-speed rail. So in this case, what we talked about was, again, they're connecting 120 different people together for approvals. So for 2 weeks solid, they were doing reviews of people. And that saved 20% in design. However, one of the big things I want to call attention to is in the video in the upper corner. You're looking at all the data, and that one right there is the 200-year floodplain. With tools like this that can be cloud connected, they can very quickly create the model, and then they can pull data from different sources to show you. That allows me to ensure that when I'm designing, I understand where my floodplains are, where my issues might be, and I can make sure with hurricanes that are happening right now that I'm not going to be within those plains, or that I know I have to design for them. I have to make plans around them. Last one here, high-tech park design. And using virtual reality, connecting BIM, they felt they actually saved 1/3 of the costs. A big part of this was the simulations. They were able to simulate traffic. They were able to simulate the hydraulics. And all of this led them to make sure that their entire team knew what was going on. They were able to collaborate using the internet to make sure all connected parties knew what was going on. They were on the same page. The design was accurate and up to date. So a lot of projects now are not just interstate or inter-country. We're also talking about international. Things like this allow people to connect, see it from the field, make sure everything is exactly where they need to be. And one of the cool things about InfraWorks is actually using augmented reality on the site. And in this case, the 6th Street Viaduct in California, using Dynamo, allow them to have multiple firsts for doing different things with a project in California, whether it's from the length, the first use of a specific kind of rebar, and the length of time that the building is expected, or sorry, the bridge is expected to run. They saved a lot of time, and time leads to saved costs. So using the different tools to connect to each other, to share that load, to use the cloud to actually speed up the process. Now, within all these tools, everything that I've shown you right now, these are real projects, real results, using the technology that's currently available. When we start looking at, okay, well, this is great now, where is it actually going to end up going? Autodesk has been talking about one of their tools called Quantum, so Project Quantum. This is going to end up being a leap forward because most of the process that we talk about, we're talking about, okay, we're going to connect Revit to Dynamo, and then we're going to do this to connect it to InfraWorks, and then we're going to send it to something else for Navisworks. The difference here is that when we talk about Quantum, we're talking about a single repository or database that everybody is connected to. So we're not looking at, as is right now, 5 different tools or 5 different disciplines with their own tools and finding a way to import or export or to publish to the other ones. So where things are going is going to be much more unified and even faster in terms of development. So this is what Autodesk is actually looking at for the next step of BIM. So just a quick recap. So the trends that are pushing this, we're talking about BIM, and again, the adoption of BIM is worldwide. Many countries and municipalities are requiring different levels of BIM. So when we're talking about BIM, it's no longer getting into it. It's like, what else can we do with it? Let's move past the low-hanging fruit of just creating a model. And because of that, we're talking about including more people. Things are becoming much more collaborative. And they're also going much further afield to actually work together. So the cloud is really bringing that together. So what is collaborative BIM? We're taking normal collaboration. We're creating much more continuity by ensuring everybody has the version that they're looking for, everybody's working together, and we're getting much more data from that. And when we talked about this before, we had our Lonely BIM and Social BIM. But since this is talking about the cloud and the internet, you can't do that without having kittens somewhere. So think of it this way. This is Lonely BIM. That's Social Connected BIM. You can't say no to that now. So again, connected BIM, build, operate, design. It doesn't matter if it's civil, architectural, construction. We're joining all these things together. We're taking advantage of the cloud to enhance the workflows. We're not just looking at a single Revit model and saying, perfect, we're done with this. We're looking at that Revit model, connecting it to other Revit models and other tools that aren't Revit, and then taking it much further. So, got one last poll for you while I answer some questions. So one of the things we'd like to do, we'd like to know, is this webinar what you were looking for? Were you satisfied with it? It'll help us gauge what we're doing and make sure that we're providing the information that you're looking for in future webinars. So I've got one question here. Let's see here. So the question is about the Autodesk Office. So what tools was that using? Are those actually available? And yes, they are. So the one that I'm actually talking about is the Office Space, where it was running through all the different options. So the technology they used was a project called Fractal, which is still in beta. Now, the thing about that is previously you needed to use something called Dynamo Studio, which wasn't free to use. However, that has actually become free. So what we end up doing now is, in the last couple of weeks, people that have access to the Autodesk collections and are on maintenance, you have things like Format, Format Pro, Dynamo Studio, the robot structural analysis. Those are all now part of your subscription. So if there's any questions that you have on that, definitely feel free to reach out and we can set you up. But you now have access to Dynamo Studio, which connects to Fractal. So if you wanted to, you can actually start trying that out yourself. Any other questions on anything? Okay, I see another one here. What is the best way to get facility managers involved with BIM? So in this case, it looks at a couple of things. If you have somebody like a facility manager who is not doing anything with BIM yet, so what they're really talking about is, I want to start doing something. BIM 360 Ops is a great tool on that. It allows you to create all the information. It doesn't need to have a Revit model or a BIM 360 field connection. It helps if it does, but it doesn't require all of that. Now, if somebody is already doing some FM work, they're using something like Maximo or Archibus, then there's different opportunities to actually connect the models to them. Now, we've actually created some tools, Model Stream, that can connect a Revit model directly to Maximo to ensure that all of the information in there is connected both directions. If you update it in Maximo, you can update your Revit model to ensure that it's an accurate as-built, and vice versa. So most of the time when we're meeting with a building owner or a facility manager, find out what their pain points are, see where they want to go, and then start showing them some of the solutions. And like a lot of things that we showed here, I showed examples of actual projects. We can show them things that other people are doing and give them real-world examples. This is a case where we had a problem where a pipe burst, or there was, with actually one example, we were on site with a client of ours. We helped them with the BIM implementation and the facility management. We're in an office and rusty water starts coming out of one of the pipes. Normally what they would have had to do in the past is they'd have to start going through and poking holes in the wall and actually trying to find all the different valves. But we had a 3D model. So we were able to isolate that system, know exactly where the actual clean-out valves were. Second one we checked, we had it. So within 15 minutes, we found where the issue was. It's those real-world examples that can say, okay, well, how long do you normally take to solve this problem? How do you normally track? How often you need to do maintenance? How do you normally handle tickets? And then we can show them how we can help them out with the actual FM tools. Any other questions? So if anybody does have any questions afterwards, definitely please feel free to reach out. We have a couple of other webinars coming up in the near future. So beginning of October, we have InfoWorks as a design tool. A lot of people look at InfoWorks and they think, oh, it's civil. That doesn't apply to me. But in actuality, InfoWorks works very well from design for infrastructure projects as well as for architectural. think of it this way. If you've ever had to present to a planning board or a town, this makes it much easier to show, this is what it'll look like from your house or from your road, and show the building in the actual context. And following up on that, in the middle of October, we'll be talking about BIM for project management, going over, not from a design standpoint, but from as a PM. What does that mean for you? How is it going to change the way that you work? What are some of the things to think about and also to talk about when you're talking to your clients? So that way you're not making promises for things that you weren't prepared to give. Again, thank you very much for everybody for your time. Definitely appreciate it, and look forward to talking to you next time. Thank you.